Hi, my name is Bob Brooks, and you are watching the Prudent Money channel. I want to share a question that I got that came in that I think it was a really interesting question. Had to do with financial advisors. It says, "Dear Bob, I'm looking for a financial planner. There are a lot of things to consider. In fact, I've watched your teaching course on selecting a financial advisor. If you had to narrow it down to one quality as being the most important quality, what would it be?" I love this question, and if you watched my teaching video on selecting a financial planner, in fact, I talked more about how to trust one. If you watch that, you would see that there's a lot of things to consider. And so narrowing it, but you can narrow it down to one thing. And it comes down to this, the Fiduciary Standard. And this is the highest standard of care between an advisor and a client, which states that the advisor has the legal and ethical duty to remove all conflicts of interest in placing the client's interest ahead of their own. Now, you may be thinking, well, isn't that what advisors do? Don't they place the client's interest ahead of their own? Nope, not always. And it's because of a couple of reasons. First of all, in a commission-driven situation, there could be three products that an advisor wants to recommend for his client. One pays a higher commission than the other, and this one pays a higher commission than the other. And what ends up happening is that advisor can look at that higher paying commission and rationalize in his or her own mind, that's the way to go, and recommend that when that may not be in the best interest of the client, but it was more in the financially best interest of the advisor. There's a lot of conflicts of interest, and I'll show this and explain this to you. But so how do you know if an advisor is a true fiduciary when it comes right down to it? I mean, how do you even know? Because that's something you don't realize for years through a lot of different transactions, through a lot of dealings with that advisor. It's so tough to know, and it comes down to this. And this is a phrase that I coined called a contrarian decision maker. Now, walk through this with me. This is someone who bases decisions on both sides by removing all biases, being open to all aspects of the decisions, and own their beliefs rather than rent them. And we've talked about that concept of belief renting on other teaching courses. But let's unpack this definition, because I think you'll start to understand what I'm talking about. Someone who bases decisions on both sides by removing all biases. Now, as a financial advisor, I will admit I have biases. I have a bias towards the fact that I think fee-based money management works the best. I have a bias towards fee-based consulting. It removes the conflicts of interest and that the commissions can create. Now, I can sit in front of somebody and talk to them about my fee-based money management program, and I could realize that, boy, this just is not a fit. This is not going to work out well. They need to be talking to a different type of advisor. That would be putting their interest ahead of mine. Now, if I put my interest ahead of them, I would do everything I could to talk them into and try to convince them that this was the best thing for them when it really isn't. So that's the first one, removing all biases, being open to all aspects of decisions. Now, this is important because this means that as the advisor, I'm going to look at every available option, not just two or three different things. I'm going to make sure that I've vetted out every possible option, alternative, and coming up with the best type of plan, even going against the mainstream and recommending something that mainstream says, oh, that's no way that would ever work, but I see it as the best interest. And then owns their beliefs rather than rent them. This is very important. Let me kind of review what I mean by that if you haven't seen that video. You know, a lot of times we go and we'll listen to somebody speak about money, about finances, investments, whatever it is, and they'll say something, and you'll go, that makes sense. I think I'm going to, kind of subconsciously you adopt that belief for your own. So you rent it. And the reason you're renting that belief is simply because you don't know what it means, but it sure does sound good. And if someone asks you, what do you think about, say, XYZ stock, and then you spout off what you heard, they'll go, oh, that makes sense. But if you say, why do you believe that way? You would go, I don't really know, but the speaker said something about it, and it really made sense to me. So it's important that, and there's a lot of belief renting going on. There's a lot of information that comes down from, I'll give you a good example, like from mutual fund companies to advisors saying, this fund is great. Let me tell you why this fund works, what's different about it. And they take that at face value, then they regurgitate that to their clients, not really understanding. A contrarian decision maker says, well, let me look at this and figure out why this isn't true. I mean, they really vet it out. They understand the pros and the cons and why it might not work. I was talking to my doctor not too long ago, had a physical, and we were talking about it. He's the ultimate contrarian decision maker. And he says to me, he goes, you know, drug reps don't like me too much because I start asking too many questions and I make them back up their theories and make sure that they know what they're talking about. And this is the same thing, that you look at all aspects of a decision, because here's why the decision part of this is so very important in the fiduciary standard. You are relying on an advisor relationship to help you make decisions on something that you know little about. That's what it comes down to. And so if you're placing your trust into them to be a fiduciary, you want to make sure that they are making good decisions when they come to you with a recommendation. So this is what you're looking for, and this is something that you can spot pretty much up front if they are this contrarian decision maker. Long-term success with money is determined by the effectiveness of an individual's ability to make prudent decisions. I so believe this, and I've seen this. And what we, kind of with money, what I think we are maybe a country of bad decision makers. We haven't honed the skill. It's a skill set that I would encourage anybody to really work on. I mean, there's volumes, books written on about how to make effective decisions, but learning this skill set is extremely important. But here's some key attributes of a contrarian decision maker. First of all, places a high value on research. If you're going to be able to look at the pros and cons of every financial situation, every product, you're going to have to do a lot of research. You're going to have to do a lot of research into new and upcoming investments that are coming out. And there's always different types of investments being brought out to the marketplace. So you're going to be doing research all the time and learning and understanding that. So you place a high value on research. The second one is doesn't exclusively rely on third parties for answers. This is belief renting. I see this all the time with these big brokerage companies, is they have research departments and they send out these flyers and this is why you should invest in XYZ. Take this to your clients. And now you got to remember, they come to maybe some of those conclusions with a little bit of bias. And now you're transferring that bias to your clients. And but a key attribute of a contrarian decision maker, they don't do that. They don't rely on third parties. Now, the third one, you are getting the best advice for the fees or commissions you are paying. You've always got to, you have to assess value, especially I think if you're paying a fee. For instance, they're not getting much value if you're paying an investment management fee, excuse me, to someone that is managing money for you. If they're not doing anything, they're being passive, they're not actively managing, but you're still paying a fee. You always have to feel confident that you are getting value for the fee. And the fourth one, they make it a priority to explain pros and cons before rendering a verdict. Now, the contrarian decision maker is going to sit down and say, look, here's the universe of things that you can do. These are the steps that you can take. These are the strategies you can undertake. And this is the pros and cons of various ones. And this is why I settled in on this one, because why I think this makes sense. So they vetted everything, and they're not just cherry picking a strategy or cherry picking a product to recommend, that decide to recommend to you. Now, examples of scenarios that could have bias. I've talked about this, an advisor who relies on a company research team. You see this is the big brokerage houses. We talked about how it's almost kind of a transference of bias from their research team that you're transferring to your client. A captured advisor. Now, what I mean by that is an advisor who works for a company and all that they can provide are those company products. So it could be insurance, it could be annuities, it could be a mutual fund company, but it all they're captured by that company to give you those products. Now, there's nothing wrong with a captured advisor, and some of these captured advisors have good products. What you have to do, though, it's impossible for them to look beyond, obviously, what they have to offer. So you have to maybe talk to other advisors and kind of compare and contrast. And then, of course, there's the commission versus fees. Now, my bias, as I said, is that I think that being on the fee side of the advisor world eliminates a lot of conflicts of interest. The only conflict of interest that could be there is that they're charging too much fees. So if you're charging too high of a fee structure, that fee structure may not be in the best interest, once again, of the client, and that can fall on the fee side. Obviously, on the commission side, one of the problems with the market today is that you have all these investment products and you have different commission fee structures. They're not level. So that can create a conflict of interest. Incentive programs. To me, I can't believe these are still around. Back when in the 90s, there was tons of incentive programs, and basically it was, if you sell from our mutual fund company, you'll get this additional benefit. That can create conflicts of interest. That is still occurring today. You still see insurance companies giving away free trips because you invested in a particular product, and you've got insurance wholesalers that are pushing these products. It can cause a conflict of interest. And then there's the sales litmus test, the pressuring techniques. I talk about this, that if you're working with an advisor who is just hammering on you about buying something, who's pressuring you, they don't have your best interest at heart. Nobody can convince me that they have your best interest at heart. So that's something that's a big red flag anyway. They should respect the way that you make decisions. That is somebody who is operating under fiduciary standard. And then recommending parallel shifts. Now, what I mean by that is that you're an XYZ mutual fund and your advisor calls you up and says, hey, listen, I think that we ought to get away from XYZ fund. We should sell it and we should go into ABC fund. And you look at the funds, and of course they're going to earn a new commission. And the question that should come out of your that you should direct at them is, now what's the value created for me going from this fund to this fund? And because they are recommending something that creates a commission, may not be in your best interest. So here's the questions to ask, and this is what I love about these questions, is the fact that these are questions people typically ask in the advisor process of selecting one. And the first one is, how do you go about making decisions? This is an interesting question, and one that people that don't really have a decision-making process, they're going to struggle with. You want someone to tell you how they go through the process they go through, the decision-making process, how they come down to a recommendation. They should be able to be very detailed. I think it's a little bit of a red flag if they're not. What amount of time do you spend researching for future recommendations? As I said, they should, if they are passionate about researching, they should be able to go through their methodology, what they look at, what they consider, how they vet out products. And the next one is, give me an example of a time where your recommendation didn't reflect pop culture finance, or in other words, the mainstream. I got to tell you, I want someone who thinks out of the box. I want someone who's not scared to think differently than the mainstream. And if they can't answer this, if they can't say, well, one time I went against conventional wisdom. In fact, I do it all the time. That's the kind of individual that I want. That's a contrarian at heart, someone who thinks differently than the mainstream. And you want to see a good example of that. Finally, what is different about you and your practice than from the mainstream? Very important question. And if they are different from the buy and hold XYZ fund traditional investment strategy, they're going to tell you, and they're going to be very passionate about it. And so you can tell that they are different from the mainstream. Now, I don't want to suggest that all advisors who practice mainstream financial planning and investing are not operating under fiduciary standard. It's just something that you want to know. So it comes down to trust, and you've got to be able to trust that they are following a fiduciary standard, putting your interests first, and that you can tell that, once again, by how they make decisions. It's a very key skill set, and you got to remember, here's the bottom line with it, is that you're going to somebody, and break it down, look at it this way, you're going to somebody to help you make decisions. You want to make sure that they are a good decision maker and have your best interest at heart.